everyone who's joining us and on time. Welcome again. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, where you're from, what you do. It's always nice to see who's joining us in the room. So welcome from Always. And I am Marian Adake, and I run digital events here, and really excited to be part of this organization. As some of you may know, we are a nonprofit dedicated to amplifying female voices, accelerating female success, and creating a tech culture where women are leading, shaping, and funding the future. Our events and the volunteers who make them possible are definitely key to building and amplifying this movement. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping rules, or items, not rules. This is a webinar, so I want to point out a few features. You can use the chat function again to introduce yourselves and to others on the call. It's always nice to see who's in the room with us. If you do have questions throughout the session and for the panelists, please use the Q&A box. That is what we'll be paying attention to. And there will be a recording of the webinar for you to access as well. You will be able to access that after probably tomorrow, after the session. And we want to take a moment to just thank our sponsors. And here are some of our founding sponsors. As a nonprofit, our events are made possible by the generosity of our individual sponsors. So we're very grateful for that. And a basic overview of our agenda. We're going to do 45 minutes where Jacqueline and Alexandra are going to be speaking. Alexandra is going to be sharing her story, and then we will jump into the last 15 minutes of questions from the audience. And as questions do come up, we may take some of those questions during the session, so we'll keep an eye on that. And without further ado, I will be introducing our moderator, Jacqueline Ros Amable, who is Managing Director at NextCorps, the newest climate tech accelerator program. She brings immense experience in supporting and growing innovation ecosystems from Canada to Argentina, as well as her own journey as a successful entrepreneur. She was the founder and CEO of Revlar, Instinct personal safety device, an app-enabled wearable technology that lets trusted contacts know your GPS location and if you need help at any click of a button. When leading the company, she became one of the first Latinas to raise millions from well-respected investors like Foundy Group and so forth. And after selling and exiting, she became the regional director for the Americas for Techstars, where she led fully remote multicultural teams and provided coaching and support to diverse group of entrepreneurs. So thank you again for joining us, Jacqueline, and I will let you, start the rest of the session.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. It's always so funny to hear your bio, because in the moment, it was really, it always feels like such a hot mess when you're in it. But thank you for that introduction. I'm really excited to introduce our speaker, Alexandra. I was really blown away by her founder story. I got a bit of a sneak peek to this when her and I first connected. So you guys are definitely in for a treat. Alexandra is the co-founder and VP of marketing at 8 Sleep, the world's first sleep fitness company. They've raised over $65 million in venture funding, holy moly, and have helped over 30,000 people get sleep with its cult favorite Pod Smart mattress, known as the Tesla of beds, which is some incredible marketing. In 2017, Alexandra was named Forbes to 30 Under 30 in consumer technology and has been a guest speaker on topics of brand and business building events, including YC Female Founders Forum and Web Summit. Alexandra is also an angel investor and a scout for Clio Capital and was raised in Tijuana, Mexico, where she now lives in New York City. So excited to have you, Alexandra. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Still in New York, still holding it down here.
I know, it's funny how people are making it feel like the apocalypse. I'm like, it's really just kind of boring for New York, but it's fine.
Yeah, it's nice today too.
And I shared a bit of your story, but what a journey to have. I used to live in Mexico for a little bit, and I know, what a culture shock it was for me moving to the States. Would love to hear from you a bit about your journey and how you ended up at 8 Sleep.
Yeah, it's honestly nothing like would have ever thought that my life would look like. It's what you were saying, like sometimes it looks like a hot mess when you're in it, and then you step back and things start making sense. But yeah, I grew up in Tijuana. My parents are Mexican. Grew up there my whole life, went to college in Mexico as well, in Monterrey, and then always wanted to live in New York. So that is something that since when I was a young kid, New York was always very fascinating to me. And I got to visit it when I was a little bit older and fell in love with the city, and ended up just kind of happening after college. And I moved here and I started, just like whatever job I could get. And it's always in marketing, that's my background and my passion. And how I got to 8 Sleep is because my husband, who's my co-founder and our CEO, Matteo, we've now been together for like 10 years. He actually has problems to sleep. And so he's the one that started looking into this space and trying to understand how could we use technology to help people sleep better. And so when he started looking into it and he connected with Max, who's our other co-founder and our CTO, they built a prototype. They were like really kind of getting something off the ground in very early stages. They looked at me and said, well, we need someone to bring this to market. Do you want to take lead on the marketing side of building this product? And I had never really worked in consumer marketing. At that time, I was working at a financial technology company in New York City. It was, our clients were really independent wealth advisors. It was a very different space. And I looked at them and thought, well, if you guys trust me, right, this is something I would want to do. I don't have the experience, but if you trust me and we will figure this out together as founders, like I'm in. And we left New York, actually. We moved to San Francisco, and that's how we've been since, now 6 years.
And I think it's also probably an amazing testament to how great you are at your job, because that, right, like, that's a lot of pressure in a way, right? Like your partner to do that. I've seen some very successful husband and wife co-founder teams, actually with my time with Foundry Group. But I can imagine it's hard to shut down at night. Like it's hard enough for me when we're in different spaces. Also married to a founder, so I know how we're an intense group of people, right?
It is.
And so how would you describe 8 Sleep to somebody who doesn't know it?
Yeah, so we're a health and wellness company focused on sleep fitness. And what makes us different than any other company that works on sleep is that we believe that technology holds the keys to help people sleep better. We don't think that tech gets in the way, that actually when properly designed and used, technology can uncover all of the secrets of why we sleep, how we sleep, and how we can change our habits and create the perfect environment for sleep. So that's what we do day in and day out. We have over 30,000 people that sleep in our product every single day and growing. So, every year now, I think now we're up to over 72 million nights of sleep, or I don't know, some crazy metric on like how many hours of sleep we've tracked, like over 75 million. So it's fascinating to think what technology has given to us as an opportunity to optimize these 8 hours that we're spending every single day for the ultimate benefit of health and wellness. That's how we think about it. Our signature product.
You? Oh, so sorry.
Is that you're saying if that's one behind me?
Yes.
Yeah, because I'm working in my bedroom.
Okay,
so
great.
That is the pod.
I was just like, this is it. That's incredible. That's really exciting.
It's like right under that comforter, which we also sell. So yeah, it is, the bed is a signature product. So that's the main product that we sell. We developed this technology. It's full of sensors, temperature regulating technology, and this is like our 1.0, right? It's like the real vision of it is eventually all of us humans are going to be sleeping in beds that are going to be doing so much more for us than just helping us sleep comfortably. That is creating the perfect environment, tracking our health, our sleep, HRV, heart rate, respiratory rate, stress levels, all of that can be tracked through your bed. And who knows, maybe we'll be able to sleep less hours, but recover just as well as when you sleep 8 or 9 hours, which means we'll have got like many more hours back in our life.
Okay. Can you tell when like our pets jump on our beds at night too? Like,
yes, yeah, actually, or when kids get in bed.
That's adorable. Sometimes data is really charming in a way you don't expect.
Yeah.
When you were gearing up for your Series A, right? Like when I think about my past experiences, the early stages is really about kind of nailing that brand and getting that original story about what did you see transform in how you were getting the message out when you were going from pre-seed to Series A? What was that like?
For us, actually, and this is probably like the biggest mistake that I believe we made in marketing, was that we didn't actually clean up our story until maybe 2 years ago. So it wasn't until after our Series B that our investors said, if you continue to position your company the way that you're doing, you're going to have trouble growing and you're going to have trouble raising money in the next round. So I can talk endlessly about this challenge, and I would urge anyone, especially if you're pre-Series A, to really focus on cleaning up that story first, because it's so fundamental to what your customers or your users think about you and how they talk about you to others, and how investors perceive you when you're having those conversations. So I'll talk a little bit about what was happening back then. Like if I step back to where we were at Series A, actually even before that, it's like at that seed stage, it was like pre-Y Combinator. We were a crowdfunding campaign. We made 1.2 million in pre-orders, and our pitch was that we were building a smart mattress cover. And the benefit, what, like how we were selling it is make your bed smart. Like, this is so like niche, you know, this is only for people who are like super into smart things. This was 2015. So granted, IoT was like a growing space, but there was nothing that was emotional about it, right? It didn't connect with most people's lives. Like, what's the real benefit of like having a gadgety thing on my bed? And we still sold all of those units with that pitch. So something that tends to happen, I think, for all entrepreneurs is like, you think that that's the signal, right? Like, you use that message, you get like some sort of result, and you think, okay, this is it. This is where we double down, and we're going to continue to pitch ourselves in this way because look, there's people willing to pay for it. The reality is that that was just a certain type of person. It was a very small group, right? Like, there's only so many customers who are going to be attracted to that pitch, and it's only so many investors that are more willing to bet maybe at that stage on team instead of product, right? And so maybe they're willing to forego your crappy pitch for a while because they believe in the team and they believe that eventually you'll figure it out. But as you start progressing, that doesn't work anymore. And we lived that firsthand. We started evolving our product line, and we actually consolidated our technology into a mattress. That's another story of how we got there. But as we did, we were trying to sell the mattress with the same pitch of the technology accessory. And it wasn't working because it was only attracting people that were a certain type of audience, people that were looking for smart home products, people that were very into technology. So eventually we were lucky enough to have that conversation at the Series B level that we should have probably had way before, where our investors said, what's happening is the next round, the investors are going to perceive you as a mattress company with technology. So you're going to get compared to mattress business. The numbers on a mattress business are very different than what you're really building. The vision of this company, the sort of team, your moats, everything is fundamentally different. So if you don't take yourself out of that category, no one's going to give you the money because your numbers are not going to be comparable to the place where they think you belong right now based on how you're telling your own story. And so that was kind of the challenge that we were in front of. And we went through an entire exercise that I'm happy to talk through more, and change and completely reposition the company, essentially. So the way that I describe the company now and say that it's a health and wellness company is focused on sleep fitness, how I talk about it, if I listened to myself 2 years ago, it was completely different. It was all over the place. It was not differentiated. It was nothing special. And it was honestly not being it was not fair to how we really thought about it. We were kind of scared of like bringing this all to life. We were scared of being different. We were scared of telling our real mission. We were scared of articulating what was really happening because we were thinking that the market was proving enough pool with that sort of conservative, crappy pitch. So let's keep it like that. Let's not touch it because we could break it.
And that is such a process. How long did you think that process took? Like from that conversation through, because I think a lot of time people think, oh, okay, so you took a couple of weeks, but it's usually over quite a span of time, right? And you know, did you do customer interviews? Like, how did you arrive at that new language?
Yeah, so I would say that probably took us probably I would say like 9 months to get to the result, and then probably took a year to see it really, like once we put it out there, probably a year to see it all like pay off. When you start hearing other people use your language, when you start hearing that language and that positioning and the way that you're articulating your vision is becoming its own little flywheel of growth, that's when you feel like, okay, this is actually worth it. Like now I can say that investment that we made in that positioning exercise is the best money we have ever spent in marketing and brand across the entire history of the company.
That's awesome. Is that when you changed your name as well?
No, then the name is a completely other story. Like we have also been through a lot of renaming. When I first joined, the guys, Matteo and Max, had picked a word that was Morphe because Morpheus are both Italian, and they thought about the god of sleep or whatever. And I changed that to Luna. Then we couldn't use Luna anymore because of legal reasons. And the lawyers were like, just give it up, you're early enough. And then we came up with 8. And then when we did the repositioning, we said, let's just do 8 Sleep because we want to be the sleep company. And so let's just make it part of our name. So it's 8 Sleep.
I do love naming exercises though. They can be stressful when you're forced to do one, like in that situation, but you know, it's always a good time. one of the things we haven't touched on yet is PR. And, I always say with consumer companies, there is such a thing as getting too much PR too early. There's definitely a time to approach it. If you get too much too early, then it's hard to go back and kind of get some of that goodwill. And so I was curious as to, as you're gearing up for that Series A, I know that probably feels like ages ago if you're past your Series B now, but, and what would you say to an entrepreneur that's gearing up for that Series A? Like, what's that right balance?
Yeah, I think now I think about it a little bit different than I did back then, but I think also the media landscape has changed a little bit. I think so comms are very important. Just working on your comm strategy is fundamental, because at all times especially if you're a venture-backed company or you're looking to raise money, you're putting a story out there for potential customers, but also for investors. So a lot of times when you think of PR and that like specific press strategy in comms, you need to think about who is your audience. Are you trying to get press for fundraising, or are you trying to get press for customers, right? And like being very strategic. And so that's where like quality over quantity becomes important, but it needs to have a goal. So for us, we've definitely done a bunch of that. Like we know that when we're gearing towards a fundraise, we think about, especially before, when we didn't have any sort of strong relationships in the venture capital space, because we were like nobody, we were like outsiders, we were always trying to like find ways to get in front of investors, because we kind of had to prove ourselves. Like no one knew us. Who would like trust these three foreigners to like build a hardware company in Silicon Valley? We had never done hardware. So that was super important for us, even before like Series A. Like from the get-go, when we launched the product, press was the most important channel to be successful in that crowdfunding campaign in 2015. And then subsequently from there, we like build those relationships with some of those journalists that covered us early on, and continue to just update them on our story. And so when we were getting ready to raise money, we would go out, right? We would plan feature releases or product updates or any other sorts of news around that time, just to stay relevant, right? And be out there, but always thinking about the qualities, like very targeted. Who are we trying to reach? Who do we want to get in front of? Over time, it has changed. I think now we think a lot more about audience development. So is there a way for us to create our own space to speak to our audience? Because when you are relying just on press, they are the gatekeepers. And unless you have built those strong relationships, or unless the journalist is really taken with your story, you may be bumped, and like it's not the story that they want to cover now, or it's not relevant enough. And you find yourself, trying to like scream your latest news to the world, and there's no one that will distribute that for you. So we think much more about that. It's like, what's our channel? How can we build that audience, and then go to media when, in a respectful way, with the news that matters to them as well, because you can't be pitching them 100 stories and see what sticks. And so we try to do a bit more of that balance. So I think if you're starting now, you're pre-Series A, I would say like start thinking about that. Like, where's your audience of your customers or your investors? Can you speak to them directly? What is that platform? Is it a newsletter? Is it a blog? Is it Twitter? Is it Reddit? Like, where are they? Do you host events? Do you have a podcast? Like, there's so many platforms now that you can have more of that control of your comms through your own channels.
And I think that's such a great thing to point out, right? Like, it's like, what are you trying to get out of it? Like, if you're trying to move units, then Forbes may not be the right medium, right? Like for us, to this day, a Mighty Girl, the Amy Poehler Mighty Girl, Smart Girls, that was, to this day, moved the most units for us ever. And I was always just like fascinated by how that impacted it. And it's so true, building authentic relationships with journalists can be so critical. And I think a lot of people think, oh, PR, you just like put it out there. And I'm like, you can be strategic about it. Yeah. And I know you all are a consumer company, but you have this other background. So when you're thinking about go-to-market strategies for C-level companies, what would you say that they should be really, really, thinking about as they're starting to plan for that?
Number one, I would say, is clear messaging and clarity on the audience. That's, again, the main mistake we made. So that's why I always caution people to think about that early on. There's this phrase that we learned from Andy Cunningham, who we were lucky to work with for our positioning exercise. She says, you can't be all things to all people. And so just to think about that all the time, is like, who are you building for first? It's okay if it's a smaller group of people, as long as you understand how you can scale beyond them eventually, and like you're not excluding other groups. but that sort of clarity is what's going to get your any sort of dollars that you put behind your marketing to really pay off. Because if you're, you know, in our case for sleep, everyone sleeps. And so you could think, well, why don't you just sell this to everyone? And even now to date, we get people within our team or investors or outside our team say, well, why are you not targeting women going through menopause? Because our bed is the coolest, like the bed that will cool to the lowest temperature and stay cool all night. So you'd think, of course they need it, right? Or why don't you build a version for babies so that parents can track their babies? And you get all these ideas, right? And then you realize, well, if I was trying to do all of that, like my marketing dollars would be spread so thin. So I just need to stay focused, and eventually I can reach them. I know they are part of my future. I can grow there, but right now I can't manage to reach the high performance person, the athlete, and the woman going through menopause. They're just not reading the same news, not watching the same channels. So I think that is the number one. And then at a seed stage, I'd say testing, like having a very, very clear testing framework for channels is very important, because you usually have limited resources, but you also don't know yet what's going to work really well for you. And in all honesty, even companies at our stage, you don't really know. It's always changing. And so figuring out, like, how do you want to approach testing? Like, how much budget do you have? How long does it take for your customer to decide on a purchase? You need to account for that in your testing framework. How much does it cost you to acquire a customer? Because you need to be realistic with your budgets. Like if your CAC is really low, you can have a smaller budget and still get significance in your data. If your CAC needs to be higher because your AOV is higher, like maybe in our case, which is like over $3,000, then our testing budgets need to be bigger. So you need to be realistic, right? Because a lot of times you're kind of cheating yourself when you're thinking that you're getting signals, and then the data is just going to drive you in the wrong direction. So I would say like those are the two things at a high level. And we did a bunch of things to actually go to market. But like if you were trying to design strategy, thinking of messaging and audience, and then thinking of your testing framework, because then from there you just pair them and you can start trying a bunch of things.
Okay, no, I think that makes a lot of sense and is some great advice. It is really hard to not confirm your own bias with data. Yeah. I think I found that to be the hardest thing, right? You're like, oh, this thing, and it. I think that with our product, it was always like, oh, I see young women love our technology, but they weren't willing to pay for it. And that was a major miss on our end. How did you know you were ready for the Series A, right? Like sales, marketing, you know, like when was it that you all were like, okay, this is when we start to go in for our Series A?
Yeah, I think there's two sides. There's the realistic side of like companies need it, right? Like you suddenly say, okay, I am going to need more runway to get to my next inflection point. Like that is normal, especially because we're a hardware business. So we have a lot of R&D and product development costs. So we need more capital than like a SaaS business, and we need more capital up front. And then the other side was like that velocity is like, am I starting to see that curve go up and to the right in sales, in any sort of other demand metric? Or do I need more resources to move it in that direction? And I have certain indicators from my testing and my learnings that if I get those resources, that it's actually going to move up, right? Like to your point, like, am I cheating myself with the data? And so if you have the velocity, or you know how to get the velocity, and what you need is the resources to keep up or to make it happen, I think like that's the story that then you go and pitch, because the investor's always going to ask you like, what are you going to achieve with this money? So they're not just going to give you the money for that first case of like saving you. No, they also want to know, what are you going to do with it, and how are you going to get to that next inflection point?
Okay. And hardware is so tricky like that. It's incredible. You guys have found so many, you know, such great investors who really understand it. And it's funny how you say about like making sure that the news hits at the right time. I remember intentionally having this interview go out that it had compared us to Fitbit, because our investors had invested in Fitbit, and they're like, oh, it's like the Fitbit for safety. And so the next day when I showed up to pitch, they're like, just saw you in the news, Fitbit is safety. And I was like, I've also heard some other crazy things founders have done to make it resonate with investors, but marketing is so data driven and in so many ways, so misunderstood, as people think, oh, like it's absolutely the brand and the way you make people feel, but if you're not reaching that audience, and that is a very data driven process, I think something that constantly, I think, surprises people about marketing is they'll be like, well, I don't really understand it, or I don't really get how branding will shift things. And I was like, well, it's not just about, you have to then know how to apply it. Right. And
Yeah.
I think that is something you guys have just done exceptionally well. So how do you define your target? Who is your target audience? I think you kind of touched on it really quickly. You were like athletes, but I'm curious, who is that target audience, and how did you decide that that was the right signal?
Yeah, so for us, beyond athletes is this kind of segment that we define as like the high performance lifestyle. It's people who generally are their early 30s is their sweet spot, so like 30 to 45 years old. They live a healthy lifestyle. They live that lifestyle because generally they want to perform better at whatever it is that they want to do in life, whether they want to be a better parent or they want to be a better chef or a better entrepreneur. And so that sort of like performance, productivity, health, and wellness is like very important for their lives. And so obviously when you think about that segment, athletes, amateur athletes, entrepreneurs, investors, executives, but it's broader, right? Like it could be people living a lot of different lives in different parts of the world, but the kind of psychology behind like what unites this group is what's very important. And the way we got to that, it was an interesting exercise. We discussed that a lot. We discussed how narrow do we want to be? How do we make sure that the audience segmentation isn't excluding other people who may find value in our product, but maybe don't necessarily see themselves reflected in the brand? And so that's why for us, more than focusing on the demographics of the groups, about those psychographics, like how are they living their life? And what are the things about life that are important for them right now? And then how do we then bring that to life with the brand, and how do we communicate it so that it's less about fitting a mold of a person, more about a lifestyle itself? And the way that we then thought about how that grows is we say, well, this group of people right now in 2020 are the people who are already aware of the importance of sleep. Like they are for us like the in crowd. They're aware of it, so they're willing to invest in it, which is important because we're an innovative product. So we can't just like sell it to everyone. Like people are not ready for it, and that's normal. And so we need that in crowd, and we identified that these people are in that segment. And we found that there's other products they're investing in that makes them more likely to buy our bed instead of another bed. And we would offer, the way that we identified that is that when we started speaking to people that fit that group, and we would talk to them at the phone, they would say, well, I decided to buy your bed because when I was searching for beds, I saw your ad and I thought, oh, that's the techie product, or that's a product for like someone that does fitness or exercise. So that is for me. So they were seeing themselves in it even before we did the rebrand. So there was already something that was clicking to them. That's like, that fits my lifestyle. That's the type of person that I am. That says something about me. So I want in. So that's what we looked for. And then we kind of actually molded and like did the exercise of understanding who they were. We know that from there, there's like another, like the next concentric circle, which is people who know that sleep is important and aren't yet investing in it. So that's where we will grow next, right? So it's like, they know it, maybe they're not as health obsessed or fitness obsessed yet, but they're, like it's when you think about a Garmin versus a Fitbit, like, there's kind of different audiences. And then for us, there's the last one, which is people who don't know or don't care about sleep at all. And like, there's less awareness. And so when we reach that level, the comms of the company will probably look much more like public health awareness campaigns, right? Around sleep. Like that's different. We don't need to do that right now because our people are in, like they get it. And so our comms will change, our brand will change as we have to expand further out.
Do you and your co-founders did you guys ever see, you probably, I always, when people always say this to founders, they're like, of course, I've probably seen this because this is what I literally sleep, eat, and breathe all day. But, I saw research that showed that women need more sleep than men. Like it's scientifically proven we need more sleep than them. Yeah. And I use that as the excuse all the time to have to not wake up early in the morning. I'm like, I need my 8 hours. You function on 6, scientifically speaking. So
exactly.
Just curious if you guys ever kind of bantered with that one. So when I think about gearing up for your Series A, like, yes, you're pushing full throttle. You definitely want to make sure your data and your numbers look good, but how do you then balance helping prepare for those pitches? Because that is all marketing, right? Like putting that deck together, telling that story. How did you help through your lens and through your role, connect those dots to create a line for investors?
Yeah. Well, that's where living with my CEO makes a difference, because we spend so much time on it. Like, that's literally all we do when he's in fundraise mode is iterate on the deck a ton, like really, really a lot. It has gotten easier over time because we have a clear story. So if it's really hard to put together a deck, it's probably because you need to figure out some fundamentals. Like, and at the beginning it is, because at the beginning you don't know anything about your business. Like, that's normal. But you should feel over time that it's at least easier to know what story you want to tell. So one of the things that we actually did for the Series B, which I would suggest any founder does even earlier on, is we took the approach where we were struggling to put together the deck. Like, we just couldn't figure out how to tell the story of the vision and where because the technology was kind of still far from where we wanted it to be, right? So it was hard to tell, like, okay, how is this thing going to evolve and where it's going in like slides. So what we decided, and we actually, Matteo and I worked on it through a weekend, was to put together a memo, like, what is the future of sleep? And we just wrote it out, and we just sat down and we spent the whole weekend iterating on it and thinking through what is that vision that he had from the beginning when he started coming up with the idea of 8 Sleep, and try and put it into words and designing what the future of sleep looks like. And actually we produced a little image of what the bed of the future would look like. And like, just putting that in paper was so helpful. And that's actually, in addition to the slides, what we sent to our lead investor, who then ended up coming on board. And it was, I think, a great exercise for us. That's still a reference material for us internally in the team. Everyone that joins gets to read it and it gets excited about it, because that's kind of where we're going. But then also, I think, to our investor, like, aligned us. You know, at that point you say, well, this is the future. This is why we're here. Do you want to help us build this? So it was beyond just like these metrics and these values that sometimes in earlier stages are still kind of like wonky and all over the place.
I would have loved to have read that. For my investors, I wrote them a song. I was trying to figure out, like, what do we have? I'm a horrible singer and even worse songwriter, but it was like, what do I have in common? It was like, how do you connect, right? And for you all, it was this memo. But I hear that from founders, right? They do something beyond the deck. They do something that helps them stand out, but also helps create a bridge in that relationship. And at the end of the day, right, business is built on relationships. Like, no matter how much data we've managed to input into our, our systems and our processes, like, there's such a human element to building a business. I mean, it requires a lot of emotional intelligence. Speaking of which, I remember you shared with me the story about this moment. And I actually always said marketing people are the hardest to hire, but you had, I think it was the data side, or there was an aspect to the marketing that was newer to you and you were nervous about it, and you kept trying to like recruit the right person. And then you realized you just had to learn it yourself. And I was hoping you could share that story, because I thought it was really powerful and summarizes so much of what founders feel a lot, which is that you sometimes just have to, dig in and do it. But yeah, please share with me.
It's been a journey, honestly. And I think that's another side where, for me, talking just from my personal experience working with my husband, has been challenging in a positive way, because he has been the person that has most, as my manager, is in a CEO capacity, but at the same time, he knows me so well. He's pushed me to understand that, like, maybe I'm the one kind of getting in my own way of my own growth, and how can I accept not just like the victim mentality of, like, as a founder, sometimes you have to do a lot of things that maybe you don't want to, or you don't feel really strong at, but taking that more as an opportunity and saying, hey, I'm not the victim here. Like, I have this amazing challenge in front of me, and maybe I can figure it out. And so in my case, as in marketing, there's all these areas. And like you said, a lot of times people underestimate it, but it's quite complex, and you kind of require the two sides of the brain. And sometimes people are stronger at one or the other, or you enjoy one more than the other. In my case, I absolutely love, and you can probably tell from when I speak, like, comms and brand and storytelling and like the creative side of marketing, I find it fascinating. It's more of an art. And I'm strong enough on the data part because of what I've learned so far, but it's not necessarily the part that I loved before. Like, it wasn't where I saw myself growing. It wasn't where I thought I wanted my career to go. I really wanted to build the brand. And because of different changes over time of the company, right at the beginning, I had to do it all, and I had to learn how to do it, and use spreadsheets and projections and budgets and like all these other things. And it's fascinating, started uncovering an amazing world for me. But as the team started growing and those challenges, right, it's kind of the bar goes higher and higher. I felt like you almost feel like you're drowning. You're like, is this what I really want to do? Can I really do it? You start doubting yourself. There's like so many things that go through your mind. You think, in my case, I thought I wasn't good at it, right? Like you start putting that in your own mind, I think a lot of times, and saying, well, I don't think that I'm good at that. That's not where I'm strong. That's not what I want to do. And then you just kind of compartmentalize it and say, well, let's have someone else do it, right? And we did it for a period of time and it worked really well. And then for other reasons, like this crazy year where we have to be leaner, we have to have a smaller team, I have to go back and do it myself. But I approached it with a very different perspective. And I said, you know what? This is it. Like I can suffer through it. I can be miserable and I can just keep telling myself that I don't know how to do it, that I don't know how to manage a large team, that I don't know how to manage budgets, that I don't know, that I don't like it, that I hate it. And I can just say that to myself every single day. Or I can try to grow out of that because I'm acting like a spoiled kid and I can actually try to do it well and nail it. Obviously understanding that there will be maybe certain areas where other people will be stronger than me. Like you can't be good at everything, but that still doesn't mean that you can't manage them, that you can't learn, that you can grow. And that was just like a very honest conversation with Matteo, with the other executives. It's like, what does it mean for me to step back in and take reins of the whole piece? Where do I feel confident? Where I don't, where I may need a bit more patience and help. But like, let's all be, have that face to face and say, like, I'm in it. Like, I'm going all in. I'm going to leave that victim mentality out the door and get myself out of my own way. And I have felt a huge difference doing that this year from the way that I was approaching it before. It's so emotional, right? Being a founder. And in so many ways, it's just the psychological barriers are greater than the skill barriers.
I couldn't agree more. You don't sometimes even realize you're doing it because you're like, well, what should it look like? But then you've done it and you're like, oh, that's what it looked like and felt like. But it's so hard. I always say being a first-time founder is like, you have to get everything right the first time.
Yeah.
And it's really scary because there's such a small room for error, right? You don't have big budgets. You are a hardware product. And that imposter syndrome can really kick in. And you have to shake that off long enough to get the job done and execute. And so kudos, because I know how hard of a mindset that is to re-dig yourself out of and to essentially re-energize yourself towards work that you're like, I didn't know if I could do that for another 365 days.
And you don't have a point of reference too, I think is what you're saying. Like you're doing it for the first time a lot of times. You don't know what the right way should feel or look like. And so you think, because we all do that, especially when you want to do things well, that you're doing it wrong. Like the default is like, I'm probably not good enough. I'm probably not doing it as good as I can, because things are never perfect in a startup. So you're always kind of feel like you're failing, right, in the back of your mind. And so to me, what has actually helped me a lot is to try to find those reference points. I had never done consumer marketing before. I had never done a D2C startup. So how the hell do I know what it's supposed to look like? How do I know how to manage a team of 9 people or how many? Like, I don't know. I've never done it, right? So finding those people that have, and asking them those questions. How should I be structuring a team, a marketing team, which is different than what my fellow executives do in other areas of the company. Like I need to learn from people that have done it in what I'm trying to do and learn as fast as possible from the best people possible, because they are my reference. And then I know, like, I think all the times, like, what would they do in my position now? Right? Like they become like, they're that kind of like these mentor moments or these maybe mentors that like come back to my mind all the times. Like what would he or she do based on what they have taught me so far in these kind of informal mentor conversations?
That's a great way of putting it. I always try to, if you haven't met Kelly Nyland, I always try to channel her when thinking of marketing too. She was a VP of marketing at Sphero, and sometimes the advice she gave me haunts me because she would be the only one to tell me this. And I would go with some other strategy because she would be the only one and she would be right again. And I'd look back years later, I'd be like, Kelly, if I had just listened to Kelly, or thought like Kelly. So just, for everybody listening, in about 5 minutes, so in about 1 or 2 more questions, we're going to open it up for Q&A. So feel free to start putting those questions into the chat. Or, put them as you want them, but we want to make sure that y'all get a chance to ask Alexandra any questions that you have around her incredible founder story. So please make sure to put them into the chat so we can see them. So, you were, I'm trying to figure out what I was trying to ask there. Let's go for this one. What would be, that one piece of advice that you give to founders?
If I had to pick one, it's so hard. I think probably is build your team in a very intentional way. Like, and your team is not only the people that work in your company, but your investors are part of your team, your advisors, your mentors, even informal mentors, your network of peers that you stay in touch with. That is your team. It's your family even becomes your team, like you said, right? Your spouses, your family, your friends, your roommates. It's a very emotional journey, and so the people that are in it with you are so determining to your success. When you're feeling like giving up, when you're failing, when you're doing well, it's the only thing that will make a difference is like who's there to help you or hold you or to rein back your ego. So it happens in all directions.
Yes, it does. They both lift you up and then correct you as hard as they can when you've gone too far to the sun. And I do think you have such a special co-founder relationship, right? I always joke that my co-founder felt like my wife, even closer than a wife in some ways, because her and I literally just did everything together. She was my best friend. And I joke with my husband now, who's a founder. I was like, I would love to work with you. And I'm not sure if that feeling is mutual. But I did read some research that shows, in today's day and age, time really is the most valuable commodity because we're always still running around. And what a gift for those people that can work with their significant other, because it's such a great experience to have this like meeting of minds in a way.
It is a love relationship. Like that's actually a talk I gave a while back on how I see a startup as like it's a love relationship, and you go through those, the period where you're just falling in love and everything's nice, and then things kind of start going down, and then you actually find sustainable love. And I feel the same way about Max, my other co-founder. Like I love him. Like I tell the guys, it's like I love you both. It's different, right? But like I feel love for both. Like we're in this relationship that is so unique. In business, is not just like you're hired at a company. Like you're actually in this tough war, and also like this kind of Disneyland together every single day.
Yes, and depending on the day, it's what part of the roller coaster you're on.
Yeah.
So we're about to open it up, but what's next for 8 Sleep?
What's next is more products. So always working and innovating. We've released a version of the pod every year. So the team is always thinking, how do we keep making the product better? What else can we do to help people achieve sleep fitness? That's kind of our obsession day in and day out. And growth. I think we want to be able to deliver a product to more places. Like there are many countries that ask us to bring it to there. Even, we don't ship to Hawaii. Like the growth for us is fundamental, and we just want to be very mindful about how we do it efficiently, since, how markets have changed both in consumers and fundraise markets. So that's what we're excited about, is just getting more people on our product and seeing how they can benefit from it. How much better can they sleep by sleeping on the pod?
Okay. That's exciting to hear. It sounds like you guys still have a lot of building to do in a good way. So one of the first questions I see here is, you mentioned earlier the first most important marketing initiative pre-Series A, and it seems like you might have cut out a bit there. So if you remember what you were saying, what was an important thing to do leading up to your Series A?
Might be when I was talking about the story.
Okay.
Yes.
So
asked, it was Sarah. Can you just review that again? The most important marketing initiative in the pre-Series A.
Yeah, I think that may have been when I was talking about cleaning up your positioning and your story. I think that in general is probably what you want to do before you go out there. And then we spoke about figuring out your testing strategy as well. So how much budget is it going to take into account your AOVs and your CACs to be realistic, and make sure that you're going to get significant data.
What's AOVs? Sorry.
Your average order value.
Okay. I was like, I know CACs, but I had not heard AOVs before. And CACs is, for those of you who don't know, cost per acquisition.
Cost per acquisition, yeah.
Any personal favorite productivity apps or tools?
I think that probably as a tool, Airtable has been pretty helpful for me and for the team. And I've used different versions, or you used Trello before to like keep to-do lists and keep track of what I need to be working on, what the team, like my direct reports, need to be working on. I really like that. Any sort of note-taking app, I'm not a big fan of any, but I've been using Evernote for a while. And so that's just a place where I can dump ideas. And then I'm like pretty old school. Like I carry a notebook with me, or when I travel, I have lists all over my desk of things.
Yes.
I like to write as a form of like, they say that there's this practice, right? When you write and you put it out there, it actually helps you remember it better. So I just find that to be a great exercise to put all my thoughts out. And then I can revisit them, but mostly it just helps as a way to like clean up my brain.
Same here. I find that to be really, and I had somebody once tell me that if you show up to meeting without a notebook, you're not serious. And I was like, okay, I will always have my notebook and pen after that. That was some clear feedback from a friend. So somebody was asking about, how did you fund your pre-seed? Like, how did you all get those earlier days off the ground?
Yeah, so it was actually when Matonex built the first prototype of what is now the pod, but at the time was just an accessory cover. They hosted a pajama party at Max's house in San Francisco, and they had a bunch of friends come over. And one of their friends, they were all like, imagine like these Italians in tech, because Max and Matteo are Italian. And so these friends were pretty curious about this thing. They tried this prototype, and one of them afterwards offered to give them the first check. So he eventually became our first investor, and he said, well, I'll give you guys $25,000 if someone else gives you money, you decide to make this a company, cash it, if not, forget it. And that's when they found themselves thinking like, should we really make of this a company or not? So that's how it started. And so early on, it was just mostly friends and family, mostly of theirs, because I didn't have any that could really help out. But that's another whole conversation on how we fundraise as minorities and people that come from different cultures, which is really interesting, lack of networks and things like that. But that's how it started. And then eventually we did crowdfunding as another way to continue financing. And then with those results, we were able to get into YC the third time around. The first two times we got rejected. So keep applying.
And I think, yes, I think that is so important. People will be like, oh, I applied this many times to this program. And I'm like, my friends applied 6 times before they got in. Like the whole point is to show tenacity. If they don't see it, help them see that vision. Yeah. So somebody did say, and I would love to hear your thoughts. They'd heard it's been a lot harder to raise as a direct to consumer company due to the preconceived notions of smaller exits, unsustainable growth. Any tips on how to position your company that is in the D2C space and how to prove you're different without sounding like you're overselling much?
It's a great question. Yeah. I think that you need to really look at your business and be honest with yourself first, like be able to tell that story and like try to uncover what is actually different about your business. Is it the audience? Is it the product formulation? Is it the distribution channel? Is it because you've cracked a certain way of like these like replicable growth loops that maybe your competitors aren't in yet? There needs to be something that is different, and it isn't only just the audience and the product. Like there may be so many other things that make it different. So I'll give you an example with our business, right? Again, we're sleep, we sell a bed. It's a very different bed, we're still selling a bed. So when we think about the wallet space we're competing for, it's still mostly half of the people that buy our product are in the market looking for a mattress, the other half are not. So for us, that metric is really important to show, to say, hey, we're actually managing, because our product is so differentiated and unique, we're managing to convince people who have a 1-year-old to 5-year-old mattress, which is still quite early to shift, to make the shift and buy a $3,000 bed because they love what we're building. Right. And so that shows like, okay, we're kind of in a different market here. Like we have the potential to build our own market and to really do something different and stop competing with all the other brands that are just trying to get you to change your bed out of comfort. Obviously, then there's the data, there's the software, there's all of that sort of like technical value that we have. But I think if you start digging, like dissecting your business, you may find something that may make it unique. And then on the other side too is like, what type of capital do you really need? Like, do you need venture capital, or are there other ways to fuel your business early on or forever? And kind of being honest with yourself there as well, because yes, the landscape has shifted a lot. Like for all companies, the way that investors are vetting businesses now is different, and your metrics need to look different and the potential needs to look different. But there are also, I think, investors for all spaces. Like there are people that are super interested in direct consumer, that understand that are okay with smaller exits. Like they will vet the business through a different lens, and that's a space that maybe they find exciting.
Okay, no, that makes a lot of sense. We're just, for those listening, we're probably gonna have time for 1 or 2 more questions. I want to be mindful of Alexandra's time. So there was one sort of about the marketing metrics at each stage, but I think, it'd be really great to hear, like in the early days, you talked about the messaging that worked and didn't work, but what were some of the metrics that maybe you used to measure that you in the long term decided, you know what, measuring these didn't actually help us? So we'd love to hear about how your view on the metrics that you find important evolved.
Yeah, for us, especially now, and I think for most companies are actively selling, like if you're particular in e-commerce right now, you want to pay a lot of attention to your cost of acquisition or your contribution margins. Like any sort of metric around efficiency, for us, our contribution margin is something that we look at a lot. So, we want to be profitable at that unit level. We want to make sure that the business is healthy, that we know how to grow in a healthy way, because that's more sustainable. Early on, we didn't pay attention to that. Like, you're just looking at your cost of acquisition at different channels and you think like that may be enough, but in reality, there are many other costs when you acquire a customer, where what customers are going to have a higher cancellation rate or return rates, like who are the real healthy customers that you want to bring into your business, something you want to think about. We used to measure a lot of, like, I would say, like, top of the funnel metrics when you start testing. Like, we would start testing Facebook ads and you start looking at the cost per clicks and the impressions, and you just need to be mindful not to make decisions off of those entirely. You want to make sure that those top line metrics, if they are positive, are matched with a positive down funnel metric, like a lower cost for acquisition. Because most of the times what we see in our business where it takes long for someone to consider their purchase is that they sometimes don't match at all. And so something that looked really positive early on in the testing may not be the best to acquire customers. So that's why I was talking, like, that testing framework's like so key, like to make sure that you're not just going off of an early indicator. You need to give it enough time to mature and to prove that that is going to bring a good return for your business. So that's what I would warn on. And then there was something that we had talked about in when we chatted before, was like the how do you benchmark, right? Like, how do you know if your metrics are good? Because maybe you're just benchmarking against yourself. Like, trying to get a little bit of like your category intelligence is another whole art of, like, well, maybe you have a 30% email open rate and you discover that in your category for, your size of list, it's maybe 15. And you're like, well, now you realize that you're really, really good, but maybe it should be 40. And so you're like, well, maybe it's not that good. Like, trying to find some benchmark data within either like a similar target audience or a category of brands is important, just so you know, like, how well you're doing compared to the benchmark and not just against yourself.
And that can be very tricky. We did have a few questions here around different tools. For those of you, maybe Marion, you want to jump in with a note here. I know that both Alexandra and I shared a list of resources and tools that we thought would be important for to have access to later. Marion, not sure where they can access those, but wanted to make sure, since I saw a few different questions about this.
Yes, so for everyone on the call, we will have a resource page shared with you via the feedback survey, which will be sent out 5 to 10 minutes after this session, and will also be available with the recording of the session on the All Raise website. So we will definitely be sharing those out with you all.
Sounds good. Thank you, Marion. I wanted to make sure they got that. Sorry, I was making sure I still had access to these questions, but I got kicked out of my other list.
Oh, did we lose Jacqueline?
Did she? Yes, and I think the other question that I saw, and I can turn my screen back on. Last question, as we have 5 minutes, what are the typical CAC comps for a consumer play, churn, LTV, etc.?
Oh, it's a great question. Probably as a benchmark, you want to think about like 30% would be your product cost, 30% your cost of acquisition, and all sales and marketing, and then like 30% your margin. That's like super traditional. And every business will be different and will change over time based on what you're optimizing for. So maybe you're optimizing for growth early on, and so you're willing to have a higher CAC, but eventually you want to find something that's more or less around those benchmarks. A really helpful thing to do to find benchmarks around LTVs and churn and other things like that. So in our case, for example, we don't measure churn because we're not a subscription business, so I wouldn't know what to share there. Look at public companies. We look at anyone from Casper to Peloton, and like, you look at these two businesses because we're kind of like not one or the other, right? But we look at all of their metrics, which a lot of them get disclosed either when they first file to go public or in their consequential earnings calls. And those are like great troves of intelligence to understand how are things doing in their businesses. And a lot of times they'll even talk about, you know, in this case, like the year, how's it going? Like, are people still buying? Is there e-commerce up or down? Like, they have to disclose this thing to their investors. And so it's super valuable to just identify what companies you want to track, set up an alert on Google, get notified when their earnings calls go live. And then there's always the transcripts, and you can even just like search through them and find some interesting tidbits.
Nice. Hey, Jackie, welcome back.
I apologize. My Wi-Fi spectrum just keeps turning off on us for like absolutely no reason. So life in the age of COVID, my apologies that you lost me.
No worries.
But I do think we're actually at the end. So wanted to thank you, Marion, for organizing this and for introducing Alexandra and myself. Alexandra, it's so great to meet you. I hope one day in New York we get to meet each other in person. But just I'm really inspired by your story and how much work and closely love you've put into this. It shows a tremendous amount of individual growth, but also just a real focus on what has to happen and how to share that story with others, especially in your space. So thank you so much for being here today. And sorry again.
Thank you.
Froze on y'all.
No problem.
I'm glad you were able to hop back on. So thank you again to the both of you for today. It has been a pleasure learning more about the journey. I myself learned so much and so much more to learn. Thank you for all of us who were able to join us. I just sent the Google Doc with resources from both Alexandra and Jacqueline for you all to access. We will be linking this up on our website, on the Allraise website underneath this event, which will be followed up by a video recap. And we will also send out a feedback survey. So I hope that you all fill it out. It's always helpful to see what you all think. And again, thank you both for your time. Really appreciate it. And thank you for teaching us so much and sharing so many gems.
Of course, happy to. And if, I saw there's a bunch of other questions here, but you can find me on Twitter, ping me, make me questions, DM me. It may take me a little while, but I'm always happy to help.
Perfect. Well, thank you again. And thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great rest of the day and week.
Bye, everyone.
See you. Bye.